Imagine groups of well-to-do white people gathering in a beautiful home. They talk about the good old days when life was better. Some of them dress up and act as if they lived decades before. They look back on a past they believe as having zero flaws, while keeping a stranglehold on their lives in the present. They see themselves as far superior to those socially and economically below them. They drink their cocktails and eat their expensive food, oblivious to any and all suffering around them. Is this a party at Bezos's Florida mansion? No. This is Charleston, South Carolina, in the lead up to the American Civil War. It could be happening right now in the houses of the ultra-wealthy, but also in the modest homes of those longing for a simpler, better time. Hello, friends. I'm G. Wiggs, and this is History and Snark. Today I'm asking, are Americans finding ourselves again at the brink of civil war? Are we destined to repeat history if we fail to learn from it? I'm leaning pretty heavily today on how history affects us in the here and now. History has been cyclic. Problems we didn't solve often come back many years later to haunt us. While no two times in history are exactly the same, we can see patterns emerging. I'll go into the history. This podcast isn't called History and Snark for nothing. Then I'll bring in the parallels with today. For most of the first half of the 19th century, the subject of slavery was the hot-button issue. The transatlantic slave trade had been abolished in 1808, but the domestic trade and slavery itself persisted. There were arguments over where people could have slaves, over if newly admitted states could outlaw or permit slavery, over if escaped slaves could be pursued to non-slave states. Lots of people had lots of opinions and were not quiet about it. No voices were louder in their defense of slavery than those of South Carolina planters, and Charleston was the loudest voice of all. Many of slavery's and secession's biggest proponents were from South Carolina, such as Vice President John C. Calhoun. The planters' entire livelihood depended on what was basically free labor. While they weren't obviously not paid, there was the expense of purchasing and maintaining the slaves. This left the planters time and money to spend doing nothing of any consequence. They would cosplay as the chivalry, revering knights and damsels such as those found in Scott or Tennyson, consciously romanticizing medieval Europe. They would even dress up as knights and have fake jousts to the delight of the ladies. They made honor, personal honor, the center of their beliefs. If a man had nothing but honor, that was all he needed. But being insanely rich was pretty good too. The chivalry of South Carolina paraded their wealth all over Charleston, but they were secretly terrified. The North, with its industrialization, was quickly overtaking the South in both innovation and money. The planters had no desire for factories or railroads. They had no desire to fraternize with upstart Northerners who hadn't put decades of blood, sweat, and tears, well, other people's blood, sweat, and tears at least, into making a legacy. They wanted their idyllic way of life to endure forever, and they'd do pretty much anything to ensure that. The other fear the chivalry harbored was losing their slaves. Abolition was anathema to them. The worst-case scenario was a large-scale slave revolt. These had happened several times before, all the way back to the 1600s. But slaveholders always defended themselves, saying that slavery of the black man was the natural order of things, and that being subjugated by whites was all in God's plan. Another example of picking and choosing what to believe in the Bible. They could tell Northerners that the slaves were happy and well cared for, since obviously they were savage and could not take care of themselves. It was only right and natural that white men held dominion over black people. But deep down, in the darkest depths of their hearts, they knew they were lying. If enslavement of black people by white people was the natural order, if they were indeed happy and well cared for, then the fear of a slave revolt would be non existent. What happy person would revolt against the natural, God given order of the universe? They knew that black people did not want to be enslaved and did not gain any benefits. It was the white planters insisting this was the natural order, not God, and certainly not the ones enslaved. Even if the slaves never revolted, abolition was the nightmare of all planters. Their entire livelihood was based on unpaid labor. How could they promenade down the high street if they didn't have hundreds or even thousands of slaves making them rich? They were waited on hand and foot, having help getting dressed, having someone cook for them, do their laundry, drive their carriages. If slavery were abolished, their entire lives and an entire region's economy would collapse in an instant. The South had become trapped in a quagmire of its own making. They were slaves themselves to a system and way of life that was in the past, a life that was unsustainable in a modern world. They created a society that depended on black people while also hating and fearing them. This is not to say the North was less racist. They were desperately trying to hold on to a past and present that was speedily falling away. This was also a patriarchal and hierarchical society. Men dominated over women, the rich dominated over the poor, the white people dominated over every person of color. Men were in charge, running everything and making all decisions. Married women had very limited legal control over property in many southern states. Many times it was an inheritance, which would most often be controlled by her husband. The wives of the chivalry did not work. They lounged, they read, they wrote letters. They called on other rich white women to do more of the same. The lower classes, smaller planters and subsistence farmers, still had their southern pride. Men would work outside and the women worked inside, raising the children. Women were educated, but how much depended on social and economic status. Some would be taught at home or sent to small schools if available. Girls from wealthy families were sent abroad to finishing schools to be ornaments for their husbands. Of course, there were women who broke this mold, as there are in any age, but they are sadly the exception and not the rule. Politically, slavery was the issue of the day. Before Lincoln, the president was James Buchanan, who tried to please everyone and succeeded in pleasing no one. The Dred Scott decision of 1857, in which the Supreme Court said black people of African descent were not citizens, and abolitionist John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry in 1859 had added fuel to the fire. Congress argued over the issue, which was basically rich white men are better than everyone, especially black people, who need to stay enslaved to protect my way of life and make me feel superior. Of course, they also felt that they were superior to women and non-rich white men, but who's counting? They'd say it's a states' rights issue. Yeah, states' rights to own another person. Debating the legitimacy of someone's humanity broke out not just in Congress, but in state legislatures, gentlemen's clubs, taverns, and street corners all over the country. And by debates, I mean knockdown, drag-out fights. The mood in the country was grim, if not outright hostile. And I think we can see that same feeling in many towns and cities in 2026 America. Today, I see two groups that, although they have very little in common, share a number of the same beliefs. They see themselves as superior to others, entitled to what is not theirs, and a wish to hold on to what they have that is so strong they'll go to great lengths to keep it. Whether you agree or disagree politically, these groups are the ultra-rich and white Christian nationalists. They see others as beneath them. They both fear and need these others, the working class and immigrants. Our government is once again debating the inherent humanity of the oppressed. Do people deserve food, housing, health care, bodily autonomy? Do they deserve the right of habeas corpus and trial by jury if they have darker skin or come from another country? Our Declaration of Independence said we had inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, meaning that there are others. It said that all men are created equal. There are no caveats to that. Another parallel is the desire to go back to a simpler time, or at least keep the status quo. The ultra wealthy don't want to give up any of their wealth and status and fight tooth and nail to keep workers underpaid and unprotected. We have seen rollbacks in worker protections, access to health care, and environmental protections, while taxes on the wealthy and corporations keep falling. All of this makes the rich richer and entrenches them more in their out of touch lifestyle. Others see the 1950s as an ideal time and not just a design aesthetic. And looking back, it often does look appealing. I'm sure part of the appeal for them is the continued subjugation of women. Women had few opportunities to work outside the home, and many of those were low paying and unfulfilling. So many women were homemakers and child rearers, taking on nearly all of the emotional labor. They probably also look back fondly on how people of color were treated, segregated. Those people couldn't steal their good union jobs. Oh, wait. Yeah. The big thing that working class white men have been sold is the idea that they are entitled to those good union jobs that no longer exist, to the house with the white picket fence that you can't afford, a wife that is always down to cook and down to fuck that you don't even like and certainly don't respect, and 2.4 kids that won't bother you. It's not your fault you live in a trailer, never finished high school, and have $100,000 in credit card debt. It's women's fault, and black people's fault, and immigrants' fault, and politicians' fault. Now, I will grant them, no, it's not all their fault. Politicians have made a lot of stupid decisions in the past 40 to 50 years, and they've led us to where we are now. But they also did such a good job of passing the blame that these people still vote for the politicians who screwed them. The world they think they want was invented by rich white men to get poorer white men to hate everyone who's not a white man. The world they want is an illusion, as sure as the world of knights and damsels was. Women, on the other hand, are being sold a slightly different lifestyle. Go back to a time when you didn't have to think. Just cook, clean, have babies, and do whatever your big, strong husband wants. For some, this is that post World War II Donna Reed tradwife era. Cooking pot roasts for your hardworking hubby, being cheerful no matter what time he gets home, or whose lipstick is on his collar. Gladly having a bunch of kids and trying to raise them to not be idiots. For most women at that time, this reality never existed. It was only true on TV and in movies. For other women, some online influencers market the prairie, Laura Ingalls tradwife era. Your husband works on the farm that his rich daddy paid for, while you bake sourdough and have 15 kids. Actual homesteading was way harder than any of these influencers can imagine. No modern conveniences like nannies or ring lights, sponsorships, and TikTok. These modern women set up a camera, add calming music, and produce a fantasy. They broadcast to millions while raking in the cash. There are actually women living the real thing right now in abusive, controlling relationships, no marketable skills for when hubby leaves them for a younger model, and no Instagram following. Just as the chivalry had no idea what living in medieval Europe was like, these women only see the tip of the iceberg. Then, as now, these groups are angry. White supremacists and Christian nationalists are coming out of the woodwork, emboldened by the current situation in America and the world. They can let their racism flag fly and not feel the need to hide anymore. White supremacist groups are more active than they have been in decades. They stir up fear of the great replacement, where people of color are the majority, and they treat white people the way white people have treated them. So, once again, we fear the people we need: immigrants, the working class. Immigrants work in the places white people won't, like picking crops in kitchens, housekeeping, childcare, all for below minimum wage. And we won't even get into human trafficking. The working class is treated similarly. Unions have been busted, and those working to start unions are being harassed. It's difficult not to notice that the ultra wealthy don't want us organized. They want us to hate each other. They all fear they will be outnumbered and out of power. Do you see how similar these 2 points in time are? We've had similar times in the Gilded Age and the 1960s, and maybe I'll do episodes on them later. And no, it's not exactly the same. But when a society depends on the unpaid and underpaid work of others, they will always fear them. They will do anything to stop change or even drag society back to even worse times. Every generation imagines there was a simpler time before everything became complicated. The problem is that the people who benefited from that simpler time aren't always the same people who suffered through it. So, are we hurtling headlong into an inevitable second civil war? Not if we can see what's happening and stop it. I see many people who are paying attention and many people who are listening to them. However, if we allow what's going on to continue, we could find ourselves in an even worse place than in 1860. People need to be held accountable for what they've done, or this will just keep happening. Thanks for listening, friends. Join me next time when I wax poetic about my favorite band, the Beatles, and why they changed the music landscape. Stay curious and stay snarky.